Greetings all. We are in the process of getting everything set up, so just bear with us for a couple minutes still. Thank you. Greetings all. We are in the process of getting everything set up, so just bear with us for a couple minutes. Thank you. Thanks all for joining the live stream today. We will be starting in a few minutes, so if you could just sit tight for a little bit, and we'll be ready to commence in about 4 minutes' time. Thank you. Thanks for joining the live stream today. We will be commencing in 3 minutes' time. So just sit tight and we'll be started soon. Thanks for joining. Thanks for all of you who have entered the live stream. We will be starting in 2 minutes' time, and there's a request to see whether we'll be sharing the slides. And yes, I will give you that opportunity later on. Just need to hold on about 1 more minute, and then we will start. Greetings all. Just waiting a couple more seconds for the witching hour to hit, 1800 my time, and then we will commence with the live stream. Okay. Again, thank you very much for joining today. This live stream will be about Agile Program Management. My name is Mike Boyle, and I'm very glad that you were able to join us today and hope that this will be a worthwhile experience for all of you. So without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to first go through the agenda. As is always the case, we seem to have different definitions, so I thought it would be good to go through a couple of different terms to make sure that we're all looking at the subject matter in the same perspective. What is program management in the traditional way? I will give you a brief overview. This will be rather brief, and then talking about what's the difference between the traditional way and an agile way, and what does this transition look like? And then lastly, what you need to do to make it happen. So let's get started. First, I'd like to go ahead and explain to you this diagram that you have on your screen right now. For a number of years, I always struggled to figure out a rather simple way to describe the issues that we have tied to the necessity for Agile. And I think that it's this depiction of yin and yang describes it quite well. But let me go ahead and let you be the judge. Let me describe exactly what you're looking at. As you can see over on the right-hand side, we have standards. And of course, we do need standards. What happens if we don't have any standards? Well, things get rather cumbersome or a bit chaotic. Right doesn't know what left is doing, and we need some sort of structures to make sure that everything works out okay. But there's a problem with this way of looking at things. If we solely only look at the standards or the structures, that means that our goal is to come up with more efficient ways of doing things. Generally speaking, not a bad idea. But if efficiency is our only goal, then we see a situation where what we're doing isn't very efficient. And so we need to come up with this balance. As you can see over on the right-hand side, we have flexibility. Now, if we were to have complete flexibility, then that wouldn't get us very far either. So if we cannot go ahead and concentrate on coming up with the structures on the one side and the ability to make sure that we're always being effective, then we're always going to have a problem, right? I personally believe that taking an agile mindset allows us to go ahead and accomplish both the standard and the flexible. And I'd like to go ahead right now and break down a misconception that we have about agile. Agile does not mean you can do whatever you want. Agile doesn't mean that there is no coordination. Agile does mean you have discipline. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about here, discipline. If we do not know what we want to accomplish, then how do we know that we've actually mastered it? We need specific structures that allow us to actually go ahead and accomplish those things that we've set as a goal. And this only can take place through discipline. Discipline takes on various facets. One, defining what we want to do in the form of a governance or some structures that we've commonly agreed are in our best interest. Secondly, that we continuously practice to make sure that what we're trying to accomplish, we're doing it efficiently. And then lastly, how do we go ahead and measure that our goals as such are properly being mastered? I see a number of individuals going ahead and writing in the chat box. Now, this will be the first time that I'll be trying to perform such a live stream with a larger audience. So I will do my best to go through the chat box. There will be a point in time where I'll go ahead and take a look at the chat box, see what kind of questions that you have. I will pose questions to you and hoping that you will give me a response just to make sure that I can always judge that this is worth your while. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and start with a few definitions. And you, for the most part, these are going to be coming from PMI, so I suspect that you'll be familiar with most of them. A project is a temporary endeavor. I think for some of you, this might be surprising because you think that you've been in the projects that never end. I personally have been in a number of them myself. It's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product. So that's something that hasn't been done before, or a service or a result. A project is temporary in that it has a defined beginning and end in time, and therefore defined scope and resources. Why am I taking the time to give you a definition of a project? You will see later on when I describe a program that there's a clear intersection between what's taking place on the project side and how it's being managed on the program side. Product, an artifact or a quantifiable that can either be an end item in itself or a component item. These items are also called materials or goods. Let me try to explain this one in proper English, or in simpler English, let's put it that way. So we're producing something that has some sort of form. That would be the artifact or the quantifiable. And it could be either something that is whole, in other words, a product that is fully complete, or we could talk about parts of a product. And I tried to make sure that this was not falling in line with a specific sector, like a software development, which seems to be very often the case. And so this is very general. Why is it important to describe the difference between a product and a project? Anybody have any idea of why we make a differentiation? I tend to think that we have a few PMPs out here. Somebody care to give it a stab? Why do we make a differentiation between a project and a product? We'll give it a couple seconds. Anybody care to give it a stab? Okay, well, let me go ahead and give you an explanation. First of all, a project, a project can include much more than a product. As we stated in the definition earlier, a project has a beginning, middle, and an end. But a product has a life cycle. Yeah, a product is an outcome. Thank you very much, Sumat. A product is an outcome, which is a deliverable at the end. It could be in the middle of your project or at the end of your project, depending upon the setup. Very good. A product can evolve, and it could be part of multiple projects. And I will talk specifically about that one, Barnes, because that is a program. And once the product has been released, it's no longer part of a project, but it continues to live after the project has already been retired. Yes, and that's right. Products can be in multiple stages. And in fact, a product can actually be brought back into a project. Very often releases are managed that way. But it's important to understand the difference between the two. Thank you very much for your feedback on that. And then we have a process, and I run across this one quite often. It was interesting when I was going ahead and looking to see what is a good definition I can come up with for a process. And this was the best one I can come up with, and I understand why we have so many complications tied to the difference between a project and a process. For me, this is the key part. They could be easily duplicated, or they're repeatable, whereas a project is, you could say that it's repeatable. We use the elements of one project to estimate another project. And for those of you who are familiar with analogous estimation, that would be one way that we would go ahead and move forward with that. But it's important to understand the difference between a project and a process. I have two more definitions, and I promise you we'll move on to the meat and potatoes of this live stream today. A program, and this is obviously going to be the focus of what I would like to go ahead and cover here. A program is a group of related projects. So we're talking about two or more projects managed in a coordinated way. Who's doing the coordination? Is the program manager, to obtain benefits and control not available from managing them individually. And there's one part that's not included in this definition. This came straight from PMI, that we're talking about common deliverables. And that is the main driver of a program, because if you have multiple projects and the deliverables have nothing to do with each other, you don't need a program. Okay, and then the last definition would be a portfolio, and I felt it was important to at least cover all of these elements before moving forward. Portfolio is a collection of projects and programs, and also processes according to PMI, going by the portfolio management standard, that are managed as a group to achieve strategic objectives. And this is a key part here. The portfolio manager sits between the individuals who are responsible for setting the strategic objectives on the one side, and of course the projects and programs that are responsible for making sure that they actually happen. Okay, so I tried to put together a diagram so that you have a better idea of what all these definitions look like. So you see on the top, we have the portfolio that kind of looks over all of that of what we're trying to do. We have, of course, a PMO. It doesn't have to be a PMO. I'm just using this example. If you have portfolio management who does not have a PMO, that's okay. This is just for demonstration purposes. And then, of course, we have operations. Within this component, maybe what I'll do is make this one a little bit bigger. We'll switch this one around. Yeah, that looks better. So you see under the PMO, we have the programs. So we have multiple programs. And under the programs, we have the projects. So and I'll describe that in the next slide, what the relationship is between the program manager and the project managers. And I know what you're thinking right now. We have processes within programs and also within projects. And if you say that to me, yes, I will say, yes, I agree. But I'm just using this for demonstrative purposes. In operations, they are pretty much running within processes. And then, of course, I included the parts with the products. Again, as a recap, I thought it was important to go ahead and cover all of the definitions so that you know when you look at this diagram, the one you have right here on your screen, then you have a better understanding. Because if we don't understand this part, then it will be difficult to understand the rest. How are we doing? So far, so good? I think there's a time delay, and so we'll wait and go ahead and we'll see how the response is, but I think we're doing okay. So let's do a little bit more of a deep dive when it comes to the program management. Let me go ahead and switch this way. As I mentioned earlier, the program management or the program manager is responsible for managing the project managers, because the project managers are the ones that create the deliverables that we're responsible for to accomplish those strategic objectives. Program management is all about benefits realization. So what is benefits realization all about? Very often, and I have an example later on, very often we think in projects, well, we've accomplished our deliverables. But can I ask you a question? How good, let me get a little bit closer, how good are deliverables that bring no value? All right? If the deliverables bring no value, there's another word for it. It's called waste. They're wasted. They're wasteful. And so the program manager is responsible for ensuring that the deliverables bring benefits. So how do you think a program manager can actually go ahead and do that? Well, first of all, they need to go ahead and continuously validate from the stakeholders that what is actually being delivered by the projects do bring the value. Because if they don't, then the program manager needs to go back to the project managers and do a bit of a reset. And there's one last part that's very important within program management. This is a quick and dirty explanation of program management. I'll talk a little bit how you can increase your knowledge on program management. I'll talk about that at the end of our live stream. But projects come and go, but the programs last for a long time. So what do you think I mean by that one? Well, you'll have within a program a number of projects. So we might have one project that starts right in the beginning of the program and ends maybe in the middle or closer to the end. And then you'll have another project that starts in the middle of the program and ends pretty much when the program is over. That's one part of the equation. So we'll have multiple projects that are running and over the entire duration of a program. But there's another part that's even more important than that, is once the deliverables have been released to the organization, that's when the real benefits realization takes place, right? Because if we don't know if they really brought value later on, and sometimes you can only test them once they've been deployed into operations. If you don't know if the deliverables are bringing value, then what was the point of the endeavor? And so the program manager has a very specific role after all of these projects have been completed to ensure that whatever has been put together by the projects, that they continue to bring value. Let's move on. So there are a couple of phrases that you might have heard before, and I think that for the most part, this is really what the difference between traditional and agile is all about. Predictive to adaptive. So we have the predictive model, which we're very familiar with. Again, as I'm assuming that most of the individuals attending this live stream are coming primarily out of the project management field, very possibly have PMPs or other degrees. And so we know from the traditional way that we've always learned under PMI, we go ahead and have our initiation, and then we plan, and then we plan, and then we plan, and then we plan some more. And once we've gone ahead and figured out that we're done with the planning, then we move to execution mode. And then, of course, if we have any changes in execution mode, then we go through the change control process, and very possibly we have a change control board, and basically that's how it works. So first of all, let me ask you a question, and I know there's a bit of a delay here, but I'd still like to go ahead and pose it, and I'll try to follow on the chat what kind of response you have. So why do you think we spend all these times planning? Any idea? Do we always have to spend this much time planning? Do we always know what to plan? Okay, I'm going to give you my opinion, and I'd be keen on your feedback on this one. We plan because we feel that that's the best way of eliminating risk. Now, there is a bit of a fallacy sometimes, and I'm the last one who would ever say that we shouldn't be very careful of managing our risks. But I'll give you an example. When we start talking about Agile, there's another way of managing it. Sometimes the planning can be a false sense of security because we think that we have everything covered. But I don't know about you, very often I run in projects and a lot of things are not covered. So I think there's a bit of a different way of approaching it. So, and I'm not, again, please don't get me wrong, I'm not against managing risk. Quite the opposite. I think it's very important to manage risk. And I would argue that taking an adaptive approach allows you to manage risk better. So within an adaptive or an agile approach, you plan as much as you can, meaning that we do not try to plan things that we cannot plan. That's a waste of time. Or we try to plan things we never do. That's a total waste of time. So we only plan what we can plan, and then we go into execution mode. So we plan it, we try it out, we look at what we planned, then we look at what we've actually delivered, and we see what the difference is. We make adjustments and go another round. I suspect a number of you have probably already heard about the Plan, Do, Check, Act, or the Deming cycle, coming from W. Edwards Deming. That, for me, is the basis of an agile mindset. And so if you were to imagine that we're only planning as far as we can, and we understand that we can only execute those things that we just planned, then by nature we've managed the risk because we don't plan things that we have no clue about. That being said, once we've gone ahead and tried something out, we have all kinds of knowledge that we can go ahead and use later on. Knowledge that you do not have when you're just continuously planning. Now, some of you might not necessarily agree with that, and I would even argue that what I just told you doesn't always apply. That being said, I think that it's good to realize that there's another way of doing things. And of course, we have had great examples over the last 4 months of why an adaptive way of thinking is probably not so bad. And if you've looked to see what companies are doing, and very possibly that you've been going through this yourself within the companies that you work for, did you know how to go ahead and manage COVID-19? I'm looking at the chat box. Any of you? I didn't think so. Did we know, even when it took place, were we assured that we were coming up with the best solution to manage it? Take a look at the way that the governments are managing it. Take a look at the way that companies are managing it. Look at how companies are running across problems that they could have never imagined before. So the best thing is to go ahead and look at the current situation and figure out some way to solve it. It does not mean when you've tried to solve it that you're automatically going to solve it. You don't have much time. And so you're compelled to be very, very adaptive. And in fact, in a number of articles that I've read since we've gone into lockdown, it's been amazing for all these companies who really felt that they could not be agile before, or they've given it lip service to be agile. Now they're really being agile. And that means they are not going ahead and trying things that put the company at great risk. They're taking what I call small bets, which give small rewards. But in this particular case, they could be actually huge rewards, because sometimes we're talking about the existence of a company. I like this. Yeah, I see that you agree with a lot of these things. That's very good. Thank you for that. Here, I'd like to go ahead and close the loop with this whole idea of benefits realization. And I suspect that a number of you are familiar with this diagram. It has various names. I call it the triple constraint, but I know that it has other names. And so we see that we have 3 components that are related to each other: the cost, the time, and the scope. So that means, as we know, being project managers, if the scope changes, that has to have an effect on the cost and the time. Or if we are behind in time, the way that we can actually go ahead and solve it is to reduce the scope or increase the cost, take on more resources. But there's one problem that I always see within this model. When we talk about scope within projects, we're talking about deliverables. So what we are actually producing in our projects. But one question very often is not being answered in whether the deliverables bring value. And that's very important for a program manager, because we are trying to ensure the benefits realization to those stakeholders that have asked us to go ahead and manage the program. So what do you think? What do you think if we took this model, the one you have on your screen right now, and we were to do this, if we change the word scope to value, that changes the relationship of the other components. That means value to cost and value to time. And if we go ahead and take value as our driver, so to speak, then we always question, is it worth the time? Is it worth the cost? And I guarantee you that all of these projects that we go ahead and continue due to sunk cost bias, that we've poured so much money into these projects that we cannot stop now, this model kills that. Because now it's based on value. If you cannot prove that the cost of what you're doing right now brings value, then you need to stop it. Same with time. And I tend to think, especially within the realm of program management, we're looking at, if you can imagine a diagram, which unfortunately I don't have, but that will be for the next time. If we have the stakeholders and their needs on the top, and we look at the strategy and the strategic objectives, which of course are moving all the time. Again, COVID-19 has been a great example. And then we have our projects, the projects that we're running within the company, which of course are very much plans. And part of the problem is this disconnect between our strategic objectives from the top and what's being delivered by the projects in the bottom. And then you have, of course, the program manager who's supposed to coordinate all these parts. If we can go ahead and validate quicker that the value is being delivered to the stakeholders, then we're ensuring that what's actually being delivered by the projects bring value. The program manager doesn't come up with any deliverables. They're only coming from the projects. So it's important to realize that we need to go ahead and steer the projects properly, which is a precursor to my next slide. If we want an agile approach towards program management, and I'm not saying this is 100%, but for the most part, we clearly need to take a much more of an agile approach towards the actual project management per se. What does that mean? That means that we go back to more of an adaptive way of looking at things, as I mentioned on the slide earlier, that we are able to ensure that we can get things back to the client or the stakeholders quicker, that we're able to validate. There's a term that we use is called continuous validation. So if we go ahead and create something, then if we could show that to our stakeholders and say, is that what you wanted? And as soon as we get that validation, yes, that's exactly what we wanted, then we can continue on that process. If indeed they come back and said, actually, I wanted something completely different, you can stop that earlier. And that is very important for a program manager, because the program manager needs to make sure that the benefits are being realized. So let me go ahead and take a look. I see a lot of action going on in the chat box. That's really great. Let's see if you have any questions. No, it looks like you were just continuing with the conversation. That's good stuff. So I would argue that the program manager needs to have projects that are working much more on an adaptive level. Doesn't mean that all of the projects need to be run in an adaptive way. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Do all projects need to be adaptive or agile? Of course not. And then we have the continuous validation, as I mentioned earlier, upstream, either to the portfolio manager. That's why it was important for me to describe all of these different roles, and upper management, because the portfolio manager is really the liaison between upper management and the programs in projects. Show, don't tell. What does that mean? Show, don't tell. We can talk about a lot of things, but if we can actually show something to see whether we're delivering value, it makes the process much smoother. So the idea here is to be able to deliver things or show our stakeholders what we're actually doing, with the intention of making sure that we're on track. And then transparency reigns supreme. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. What are we talking about with transparency? That means we're having openness. And this might be the greatest impediment towards agility, because if you've worked in corporations, sometimes it's not that easy to be open and transparent. But there's some tools that we can use. And of course, that's a prerequisite for me, that the company needs to be transparent. I don't care if we're talking about program management, project management, portfolio management, whatever's concerning the organization, if there's no transparency, then we're always going to have a struggle. There's a construct that's actually coming out of Agile and Scrum, and I purposely didn't talk about Scrum, which is software development, because for me, Agile is more of a mindset. But there's one thing that they have within Agile Scrum that I'd like to talk about, and I think it's very, very powerful in making sure that we keep things in the right direction. It's called an information radiator. So you can see on your screen, it allows for everybody to go ahead and see exactly what's going on. And for me, there are 3 key takeaways from an information radiator. It allows for information drill down. If the system is created properly, and it could be something analog, in other words, where you put Post-its, or it could be a digital program. If done properly, you go ahead and make sure that the information that the various stakeholders are looking for, that they go straight to that. So they don't have to go ahead and spend a lot of time looking at presentations where they're only looking for one piece of data. So this allows them to go straight to the data and make sure that they are getting what they're looking for. And I think that there's a key component here when we raise the question about not what we're actually showing them, but how do we go ahead and show them the data? Because if we allow them to go ahead and pull the information instead of pushing the data, then we're developing much more of a trust with the various stakeholders, because they see that we're open. We see that the things that are not working out, we're displaying that information as well. And there's one big added value in my mind, if we keep this transparency. And of course, I know this is not very easy for a number of corporations. We've seen this within the lockdown, and all of that what has taken place with people working at home, and for managers to better allow for their employees to go ahead and make decisions, as the manager cannot stand over the individual employees. There might be one person or a number of people within the organization who will look at all this data that you're supplying, and they might see a problem that you would never know. You would never know that they are a stakeholder because they're not showing up on a North chart. There's somebody that you really want to go ahead and get information from. So if you allow them to go ahead and look at the data, and we're going ahead and we're open enough to say, well, things don't always work out well. And I think, again, the last 4 months have been a great example of where transparency and vulnerability have been extremely important. I would prefer, if there was somebody within the organization who knows that we are about to go over a cliff, I would prefer they tell me before I go over the cliff. Food for thought. So, as I mentioned earlier, is Agile always needed? And the answer is no. And these are only 2 questions. There are a number of questions that you can go ahead and pose to answer this question, whether you need an Agile approach. But I think that really comes down to these 2. Have you ever done it before? Is this something completely new, or do you have an idea of how it works? If you know how it works, you don't necessarily, then you can plan it pretty easy, and there's no need to go ahead and take a complete Agile approach. Is the situation volatile? If the situation is not volatile and is pretty calm, and you can pretty much predict how things are going, then there's no need for Agile. I think we know after the last 4 months that virtually everything we're doing does not fall into these 2 categories. Last point from my side, what we really need to go ahead and reach agility. As I mentioned already, the transparent organization. We need a clear vision, mission, strategy, and objectives. And I'll tell you why. Apart from the fact that it's been proven for those companies that are very open about the vision, why are we here, that they have employees that are much more motivated. Going on from the vision, the why are we here part, we move on to what are we trying to accomplish part, which would be the mission part. And then lastly, the strategy, or how do we do it part, and the objectives and how we're going to measure it part. So now, of all of these these components, if they're all clear to everybody within the organization, then whatever they end up doing, the individuals within the organization, they will go ahead and manage it against these 4 components. Okay, the why are we here part is it's an easy one. Actually, that's the one that I think a number of companies actually struggle with. But if we get down to the strategy, let's go ahead and concentrate on the strategy. If the individuals know what the strategy is and they know what the objectives are, then they can always measure what they're doing, and they can go ahead and answer the question themselves, does this match the objectives? Because if they do not match the objectives, there's one question you need to go ahead and pose. Why are we doing it? And of course, that goes to the third point, which would mean that we're talking about empowered employees. What does that mean, empowerment? Empowerment means they feel that they have the ability and the power to make decisions and do what they think is right. That means they have the support of the superiors. They feel comfortable about themselves. And in my mind, if we're talking about autonomy and mastery, which was the last point that I've written down here, if we're talking about autonomy and mastery, then the only way that we can achieve that is by having employees that feel empowered. Okay. This is the first time I've tried, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first time I've tried to do a live stream on this level, and I was really glad that I have so many people who participated today. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Most of you are coming from the LinkedIn Learning Group that which is a great setup that we have within LinkedIn, where we can go ahead and share our experiences as a group. I believe we have something like 40,000 members. And I just wanted to let you know, being for those individuals who do have access to LinkedIn Learning, that I am an instructor. Should have mentioned that in the beginning, but it doesn't matter. And I have a program management course that you can actually go ahead and take a look at. If indeed you found the subject of program management to be of interest, then you might want to go ahead and take a look at the course. It's based upon the project management standard for program management. And I would be very happy if you were able to take a look at it, give me some feedback, and let me know if you liked it. That would be good for me. That would help me out a lot. What else would I like to go ahead and mention? Somebody asked earlier if you could have access to the slides. Of course you can, but you have to let me know who you are. And so my suggestion would be, go ahead and contact me on LinkedIn. Feel free to go ahead and follow me, because I'm doing a couple different things. If you found some interest today, you might find some interest in some things that I'm doing later on. Go ahead and click on the follow me button, and go ahead and please feel free, feel empowered to go ahead and reach out to me, and I will go ahead and give you a copy of the deck that I put together today. Okay. We're learning about all kinds of complications here. This is all part of the learning curve. The camera dies after a certain period of time because it thinks I'm not doing anything, but actually trying to do a lot. I have some other events going on. I am a radio host here in Vienna. I live in Vienna, and we are currently running live streams straight from the radio show. That means we're conducting the radio show and running a live stream from it. And the subject next Tuesday will be empowerment and now what. And so I'll be extrapolating on some of those things about empowerment, and we'll talk about some various techniques like learned helplessness, or conditions, better said, learned helplessness, or psychological safety. And I've gone ahead and listed, very possibly I might have missed somebody, one of the time zones, so I apologize for that. Try to cover as many as I could. I know that for those of you who are joining from North America, it'd be way too early in the morning, so I didn't include those times. Hope you can forgive me for that one. So empowerment and now what? Please feel free to go ahead and join. I take calls on that program as well. So if you find some interest in that, please go ahead and join that. You can sign up via LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn event for that. And then I will have another event. Together with a colleague of mine, we will be covering the subject of customer satisfaction and tied to sustainability. This is within a lot of the discussions, primarily here in Europe, but I've picked up in the United States that they're having similar discussions. This is an opportunity for us to actually finally address the issue of climate change and maybe some other things that have been put on the back burner for a long time. And there are a number of us that want to live a sustainable life. And the part of the problem is that we are constantly confronted with situations where the overall experience is not necessarily sustainable. So what we plan to do in the show next week is talk about these certain circumstances and show that there are better ways to actually go ahead and manage that experience for the customer. So if you are interested perhaps in that subject, I've included a few times as well within the slide. Please feel free to go ahead and join us. It will be roughly at this time next week. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and say thank you very much for joining. Hope you were able to get some value out of it. That's fantastic. And please feel free to reach out to me. And I hope you can go ahead and join maybe some of the sessions that we'll be having in the future. Thank you very much.